October 23rd, 2077, 9:47 a.m. The last transmission from Dunwich Borers, LLC, crackled through emergency channels for exactly 90 seconds before the line went dead. What came through wasn't a distress call. It was laughter, then screaming, then something that sounded like chanting in a language the Commonwealth emergency broadcast system couldn't identify. Survivors who approached the quarry in the days after reported the same detail, over and over. The smell of ozone, sharp and metallic, hanging in the air like the place had been struck by lightning from below. The static never stopped. Even now, 210 years later, radios near the site pull in frequencies that shouldn't exist. Here's what nobody understood at the time. Dunwich hadn't just been mining granite and feldspar for 200 years. They'd been pulling something else up from the bedrock, something that predated the company, the Commonwealth, and possibly the continent itself. The bombs didn't create what lives in that quarry. They just woke it up. To understand what Dunwich became, we have to go back to before there was a Commonwealth, back to when this land had a different name. Dunwich Borers, LLC, was founded in 1876 by Edward Deegan, a Massachusetts industrialist, with contracts in 11 states and a board of directors no journalist could ever fully identify. On paper, the company mined building stone, granite blocks that built half of Boston's financial district. Their quarterly reports to shareholders were immaculate. Their safety record was acceptable by 19th century standards, 14 deaths per year on average. But Dunwich had a reputation among the workers who lasted more than 6 months. Equipment broke in patterns, always the same drill bits, always on the north face. Foremen reported hearing voices in sections of the quarry that had been evacuated for hours. In 1893, the entire night shift, 23 men, walked off the job after what they described as a sound like the earth breathing. The company's executive board met in private, always in Boston, never at the site. Surviving records show they had interests beyond mining. A 1912 customs manifest lists a shipment to Dunwich marked archaeological materials, private collection, origin listed as Mesopotamia. In 1954, the Atomic Energy Commission briefly investigated the site for uranium deposits and found none, but their surveyor filed a resignation letter 3 days later, citing personal reasons. The company's public face was steel and profit, but its private correspondence told a different story. The letters were recovered from a Dunwich executive's safe in 2289, preserved in a fireproof container 40 feet below the quarry's administrative building. 17 documents spanning 1898 to 2076, written in 4 different hands, all addressed to someone called the Curator. The early letters are corporate, discussing excavation schedules and special mineral surveys. By 1920, the language changes. A letter from 1947 references the sleeper's confirmation and notes that the old family has provided the final sigil. Another from 1963 describes a shipment of resonance stones, marked only with a symbol that appears nowhere in known pre-war occult literature. 3 concentric circles bisected by a vertical line. The writer mentions vibrations at the 800-foot depth and asks if the schedule has been moved forward. The final letter, dated October 19, 2077, 4 days before the bombs, is 11 sentences long. It confirms that the bore has reached the threshold and that we will proceed regardless of the company's dissolution. The last line reads, "If the world ends Saturday, we'll already be somewhere older." The signature is illegible, but the paper smells like salt water and rust even now. By the time the Great War arrived, Dunwich had already opened something it couldn't close. At 9:47 a.m. on October 23, 2077, the nuclear warheads fell on Massachusetts. Dunwich Borers was 22 miles northwest of downtown Boston, outside the primary blast radius. The quarry took thermal damage and an EMP surge that should have killed every circuit in the facility. Radiation monitors in the tunnels recorded 340 rads at the surface within the first hour. But at the 800-foot level, where the final bore had punched through 4 days earlier, the readings spiked to 1,840 rads for exactly 11 minutes, then dropped to 90. No fission signature, no fallout isotopes that matched any weapon in the nuclear exchange. The Geiger clicks had a rhythm. Every surface structure burned or collapsed. The administrative offices, the worker barracks, the machine shop, all ash and twisted steel by nightfall. The tunnels stayed intact. The ventilation system died. The lights went dark, and the only sound left was the drip of groundwater on stone. When the first scavengers arrived decades later, they found the quarry still active, with machines still running on power that shouldn't exist. Between 2180 and 2197, at least 6 different salvage crews tried to strip Dunwich for parts. The first team, out of a small settlement near Lexington, found a working drill press on sublevel 2 and a conveyor system that turned on when they approached it. Their logs mention a hum in the walls and air pressure changes that don't match any ventilation we can find. A 2191 expedition cataloged 140 feet of copper wiring, 22 intact terminal units, and a generator room that was still warm to the touch. The crew leader, a man named Vickers, wrote that his team heard voices echoing up from the deeper tunnels at night. Not words, just the cadence of speech, like a conversation heard through a wall. One scavenger, a woman named Hollis, described it in her holotape as a dozen people talking over each other. But when you focus on one voice, it stops and another starts. She noted that the echoes came in waves, always between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. Her crew pulled out after 5 days, with half the copper they'd planned for. By 2200, word had spread along the trade routes. Dunwich paid well because nobody wanted to stay. The salvage crews came for copper and steel, but what they brought back was madness. In 2203, a raider gang calling themselves the Splitjaws set up in the quarry to ambush caravans on the northern road. 11 raiders went in. 7 came out 9 days later, and 3 of those couldn't speak. The gang's leader, a man named Scar, told a trader in Lexington that his people had seen things in the lower tunnels, faces in the rock, tools moving on their own, and footprints in the dust that led to solid walls. The pattern took 14 years to document, but it was consistent. Scavengers who stayed below sublevel 3 for more than 72 hours either didn't come back or returned with gaps in their memory. One man, a salvager named Keel, walked out of Dunwich in 2219 and told his crew he remembered dying in a cave-in that never happened. He described the weight of the rocks, the taste of blood, the cold, and then he described watching himself walk into the quarry 3 days earlier. A 2227 report from a Brotherhood recon team mentions acute psychological distress and shared hallucinations among the 4 soldiers who descended to sublevel 4. One knight reported memories of carving symbols into stone, but his hands had never touched a chisel. The team pulled out after 16 hours and recommended the site be marked as a contamination zone. The disappearances were never solved. The Commonwealth kept no central records, and most wastelanders just stopped going. By 2240, no raider gang would claim Dunwich territory, and that's when the cults started arriving. The first group arrived in spring of 2240. 7 people, no weapons, carrying pre-war books wrapped in oilcloth. They walked straight past the rusted quarry machinery and down into the excavated chambers, like they'd been there before. Local scavengers watched them light candles in geometric patterns and stay for 3 days without food. Over the next decade, more came. Small groups, never more than a dozen, always during specific lunar phases. They weren't raiders or treasure hunters. They performed rituals in the lower tunnels, carving symbols into the rock that bled a thick, dark residue when fresh. A Brotherhood deserter named Kremvh infiltrated one group in 2251, pretending to be a convert. His account describes chanting in a language that hurt to hear, offerings of irradiated meat left in stone bowls, and a shared certainty among the cultists that something was listening. They called it different names depending on which pre-war text they'd found, but they all agreed it had been waiting since before humans learned to speak. Kremvh left after 2 weeks. He said the dreams got too specific. The Brotherhood's file on Dunwich is 80% redacted, but what remains describes something they classified as pre-human. Vault-Tech's interest predates the war. Internal memos from April 2076 reference site surveys at Dunwich Borers, focused not on the quarry's mineral value, but on biological samples recovered from excavation level 4. The samples were described as radiation-resistant organic matter, partially fossilized, with cellular structures that didn't match any known taxonomy. A purchase order dated June 12, 2076, shows Vault-Tech acquired 47 kilograms of this material for $340,000. The intended application is listed as Societal Preservation Program, Sub-Project Epsilon, with a note that standard containment protocols were insufficient. 3 researchers resigned from the project within 2 months. None of them explained why in writing. Shipping manifests tracked the samples to a Vault-Tech storage facility in Cambridge, then to 3 separate locations in August 2077, 6 weeks before the bombs fell. The manifests list the cargo as biological substrate and note that all 3 shipments required specialized shielding, not for radiation, but for what internal documents called mimetic contamination risk. Vault-Tech never built a vault at Dunwich, but they took samples, and those samples ended up in 3 experimental vaults across the Commonwealth. The obelisk was found in 2220 by a salvage crew drilling through a collapsed section of the deepest chamber. It's 4.2 meters tall, carved from a single piece of black stone that isn't granite, basalt, or any sedimentary rock native to Massachusetts. The surface is covered in inscriptions that don't correspond to any known writing system, human or otherwise. Carbon dating put the stone's age at over 1.7 million years. Spatial readings around the obelisk don't behave. Measurements taken from opposite sides of the chamber show different distances to the same object. Compasses spin. Geiger counters register radiation in pulses that match no known isotope decay pattern. In 2238, a research team from the Institute spent 6 hours in the chamber. 4 of them reported identical headaches starting at the same moment, and 1 insisted the obelisk had moved 30 centimeters closer while no one was looking. The inscriptions seemed to shift depending on the angle and the light, but photographs always show the same patterns. A linguistic analysis in 2244 identified recurring glyphs that might represent concepts rather than sounds. Things like consume, dream, and doorway. The analysis was abandoned when the lead researcher stopped sleeping and began carving the same symbols into her own arms. Holotapes from the chamber describe a sound, something between stone grinding and breathing. The name appears in 18 separate sources across 77 years. Ugg, Qualtoth, terminal logs from Dunwich Borers, holotapes recovered from the quarry floor, journals found in cultist camps from Salem to the glowing sea. No 2 spellings are identical, but the phonetic structure stays consistent. Pre-war occult libraries in Boston held 3 references to the name, all in texts predating 1930. One calls it a sleeper beneath stone. Another describes it as the mouth that drinks dreams. The 3rd entry is 47 pages of the same word repeated, written in blood, that genetic testing traced to 11 different individuals. Speaking the name aloud within 2 miles of the quarry produces auditory effects in 73% of subjects, a low-frequency hum between 18 and 22 Hz, below the threshold of conscious hearing, but enough to trigger nausea and spatial disorientation. Recordings capture nothing. The effect persists for 6 to 40 hours, and during that window, subjects report hearing their own thoughts in a voice that isn't theirs. The linguists who tried to translate the obelisk inscriptions all reported the same dream. The accounts start in 2210 and continue through 2287. Hundreds of them, written by traders, settlers, Brotherhood scribes, raiders, people who never met and lived decades apart. The dream is identical, down to architectural details. A city of black stone beneath the ocean, towers that curve in geometries that hurt to look at, streets laid out in patterns that shift when you try to map them, and at the center, something vast and waiting. The descriptions stop there. Every account ends with the dreamer standing at the edge of a plaza, looking toward the thing in the middle, and then waking up with the certainty that it saw them back. The dream recurs. 40% of subjects report having it more than once. 12% say it happens every time they sleep within 50 miles of Dunwich Borers. A Good Neighbor doctor documented 9 cases where patients stopped sleeping entirely rather than face it again, and 4 of them were dead within 3 weeks from the strain. In 2230, a Brotherhood expedition tried to map the dream's geography, and what they found in the coastal waters north of Boston shouldn't have been possible. Brotherhood deep scan sonar, 20 miles offshore, 340 feet below the surface. The readings showed structure, not wreckage, not geological formations. Architecture, walls at perfect right angles, corridors branching in symmetrical patterns, and a central chamber 80 feet across that the sonar couldn't penetrate. The layout matched the dream descriptions with 91% accuracy. The expedition dropped 3 remote probes. 2 failed immediately at 200 feet. The third transmitted for 17 seconds, long enough to capture stone, carved with the same glyphs found in Dunwich Borers, and radiation signatures that carbon dating put at over 14,000 years old. The design predates Sumerian architecture by 8 millennia. The Brotherhood pulled a core sample from the perimeter wall. The stone contained trace elements of an alloy that didn't exist in nature and wouldn't be synthesized by human science until 2050. Whatever built the structure had metallurgy 16,000 years before the Bronze Age. The Brotherhood classified the site and never returned, but fishing crews still refused to work those waters. Jaime Palabras worked maintenance at Dunwich Borers for 11 months before he recorded his final holotape. The audio quality is poor, recorded 400 feet underground on a personal device not rated for the humidity. You can hear water dripping in the background and the scrape of his boots on stone. He describes descending past the official mining levels into chambers the company maps didn't show. The walls changed texture halfway down, transitioning from blasted granite to something smoother, carved with tools that left no chisel marks. Jaime called it whispering stone because pressing your ear to it produced a low hum that resolved into syllables if you listened long enough. The holotape runs 7 minutes and 18 seconds. For the last 90 seconds, Jaime stops describing what he sees and starts apologizing to someone named Sarah, telling her he understands now and he's sorry he didn't believe. The recording ends mid-sentence with a wet sound and the clatter of the device hitting stone. Jaime's body was found 3 miles from the quarry entrance, clutching a rock carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. 47 documented cases between 2077 and 2287 describe the same phenomenon. People enter Dunwich Borers and experience vivid memories of events they never witnessed. Pre-war rituals in the lower chambers, ceremonies conducted by figures in leather masks, chants in a language that feels familiar, but can't be translated.
The memories aren't vague impressions. Survivors report sensory details with documentary precision. The smell of burning myrrh mixed with copper, the exact placement of 13 stone bowls arranged in a spiral, the weight of ceremonial blades in hands they've never owned. Dr. Alexis Combs interviewed 8 victims in 2281 and found their descriptions matched down to the number of torches on the walls and the pattern of blood spatter on the altar stone.
What makes the flashbacks impossible is their content. One scavenger described a pre-war executive's private thoughts during a ritual on October 22, 2077, then led investigators to a locked office where they found that executive's personal journal confirming every detail. The journal had been sealed in a safe the scavenger never opened. Psychologists theorized radiation-induced hallucination, but that doesn't explain why the memories contain information no one alive should know. The blade lies in a submerged chamber 600 feet below the quarry floor, driven point first into a stone altar that predates the mining operation by centuries. It's a machete-style weapon, with a serrated spine and a hilt wrapped in pre-war leather that hasn't rotted despite the moisture. The name Kremvh is carved into the blade in letters that look like English but aren't quite, each character slightly wrong in ways that make your eyes skip over them. Metallurgical analysis revealed an impossible composition, steel alloyed with trace amounts of an isotope that shouldn't exist in nature and wouldn't be stable for more than 6 hours under laboratory conditions. The blade's radiation signature doesn't match any known source, reading consistent across its length, as if the entire weapon was forged in a single pour from radioactive stock. Pre-war records show the knife appearing in 3 separate estate sales between 1952 and 2076, always described as Native American ceremonial, and always purchased by Dunwich Borers executives. Linguistic analysis of Kremvh found no matches in 2,700 documented human languages, but the phonetic structure mirrors words carved into the obelisk at the coastal site, guttural consonant clusters and vowel patterns that repeat in the flashback chants. The Institute's comparative religion database flagged 14 similar sound strings in texts describing pre-human entities, all from cultures with no historical contact. The blade's edge never dulls, and blood placed on it evaporates into mist that moves against the wind. Lorenzo Cabot wore a metal crown for 400 years, kept alive by an artifact his father pulled from a tomb in Arabia in 1678. The artifact was a helmet, covered in symbols that matched no known language, and it granted immortality at the cost of sanity. Lorenzo's ravings, recorded by Parsons State Insane Asylum staff between 1898 and 2077, included phrases that appear word for word on the Dunwich obelisk. He spoke of the city beneath, the sleeper in stone, and a timeline where humans were prey. Institute linguists compared 47 of Lorenzo's recorded statements to the Dunwich inscriptions and found 83% phonetic overlap, despite Lorenzo never mentioning Dunwich by name in any document. His helmet symbols used the same guttural clusters, the same vowel patterns that showed up in the flashback chants. The Cabot family kept 214 years of journals, letters, and medical observations. Edward Cabot's notes from 1894 describe Lorenzo's episodes of architectural drafting, where he would sketch buildings and monuments he claimed to remember from before recorded history. Cabot's journals from 1894 include a sketch of the Dunwich obelisk, drawn 30 years before the quarry was excavated to that depth. Between 1952 and 1971, the Massachusetts Archaeological Survey documented 11 sites across the state where stone structures appeared under sediment layers dated to 18,000 to 22,000 years ago. The structures used post and lintel construction with precisely cut angles, found in an era when humans were supposed to be using stone tools for hunting. Radiation signatures at each site measured 340 to 380 rads, consistent with the Dunwich quarry. The architectural style was identical across all 11 sites: trapezoidal doorways, spiral patterns carved into load-bearing columns, and foundation stones weighing 14 to 19 tons, placed with tolerances under 2 millimeters carbon dating and stratigraphy both confirmed the age. But the survey's lead archaeologist, Dr. Margarethe Vos, noted that the precision required metalworking and mathematics that wouldn't exist for another 15,000 years. Vos's team found tool marks on the stones that didn't match any known implement, human or pre-human. They found no pottery, no organic remains, no evidence of fire or habitation, just the structures themselves buried under glacial sediment. The pre-war archaeologists called it the Massachusetts anomaly, and 3 of them disappeared before the project was shut down. Miskatonic University sent a 7-person expedition to Salem in March 1928 after a construction crew uncovered pre-colonial stonework 6 meters below street level. The expedition was led by Professor Albert Wilmarth, who specialized in comparative mythology and included 2 geologists, 2 linguists, an archaeologist, and a medical doctor. They planned a 6-month dig. They returned after 21 days. Wilmarth and the medical doctor committed themselves to Arkham Sanitarium voluntarily on April 3, 1928. The 2 geologists refused to speak about the expedition and destroyed their field notes. 1 linguist left the country, and the archaeologist was found dead in his office from what the coroner ruled a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The university sealed all expedition materials and never resumed the dig. Hospital records show Wilmarth was treated for acute nervous collapse and persistent night terrors. He drew the same symbol repeatedly during his 8-month stay, a spiral within a trapezoid, identical to the patterns on Dunwich's obelisk. The second linguist's personal effects, donated to the university archive in 1974, included a leather field journal with 43 pages of notes and sketches. 1 expedition member's diary survived, and the final entry describes a doorway in the bedrock that should not open inward. The diary describes the threshold in careful detail. Carved basalt, 2.1 meters tall, set into bedrock, 18 meters below sea level. The symbols matched photographs from both Dunwich and Lorenzo Cabot's crown, but the stone itself predated known human settlement in the region by at least 4,000 years. Dr. Harrington ordered the opening on March 14, 1928. 3 workers used iron pry bars to shift the stone. The expedition photographer captured 11 frames before his camera malfunctioned. In those images, the space beyond the threshold shows no reflected light, despite 4 electric lamps pointed directly through the opening. 2 workers entered. The first returned after 90 seconds, unable to speak. The second didn't return at all. Harrington ordered the threshold sealed with Portland cement that same afternoon. His final diary entry, written by lamplight on the boat back to shore, consists of 1 sentence repeated 23 times. It was looking back. The university sealed the site with concrete in 1929, but seismographs recorded movement beneath it until the bombs fell. Between 1929 and 2077, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers encased 7 separate coastal sites in Massachusetts with concrete foundations that extend 40 to 60 meters deep. Public records describe them as coastal erosion prevention or harbor infrastructure, but the engineering specs tell a different story. Site 3, near Salem, used lead-lined concrete typically reserved for nuclear containment. Site 5 included a continuous power system designed to maintain an electromagnetic field around the perimeter. The Army demolished a functioning lighthouse at Site 7 to pour a foundation that served no structural purpose for any building constructed above it. All 7 sites share 2 features. First, Geological surveys from the 1920s mark them as anomalous subsurface structures. Second, the radiation shielding faces inward. The lead and steel weren't meant to protect the outside world from radiation. They were meant to keep something contained that could move through solid rock.
Dunwich Borers was the only site where pre-war corporations kept digging after finding the seals. Dunwich LLC purchased the quarry in 2053 and encountered the first concrete seal at 110 meters depth within 6 months. Standard procedure would have been to halt excavation. Instead, Executive Memo DL429A authorized controlled penetration of anomalous substrate and doubled the worker shifts. Between 2054 and 2076, 37 workers died in structural collapses, equipment failures, and what the reports called psychological episodes.
The Federal Mine Safety Investigation in 2074 documented persistent mechanical failures inconsistent with equipment age or maintenance records, and seismic activity originating from excavation levels despite no tectonic explanation. Dunwich LLC fought the shutdown order with 14 months of legal delays. Internal memos from that period reference breakthrough imminent, and energy readings confirm pre-atomic signatures. Vice President Hugo Sedlak's personal log, recovered from the Dunwich offices, describes what they found beneath the seal. Not uranium, not fusion cores, but ambient energy with no detectable source, no half-life, no containment requirements. The measurements made no sense. The deeper they dug, the stronger the readings became, as if proximity to the source increased its output exponentially. The company's final quarterly report, filed 3 weeks before the Great War, lists energy output from the quarry as incalculable.
Brotherhood scribe Halen's 2285 survey logs describe something that shouldn't exist. The quarry's lower levels, 200 feet below sea level, are generating 1.4 megawatts of continuous power. The energy signature matches neither nuclear decay nor fusion plasma. And when her team ran spectral analysis, the readings showed fluctuations in the 8 to 12 hertz range. That's the frequency of human brainwaves during REM sleep. The power surges in 90-minute cycles, perfectly synchronized with the sleep pattern documented in vault medical records across 3 states. Halen's final entry notes that proximity to the source caused her Pip-Boy's radiation counter to flatline, while her team's vitals spiked, heart rates climbing to 140 BPM without physical exertion.
The Brotherhood quarantined the site 6 days later. The machines in the deepest chamber are running, and they've been running for over 2 centuries, but no one knows what they're building. Terminal 14C in the quarry's central shaft describes industrial equipment that pre-war engineers couldn't classify. Bedrock refinement apparatus, 40 feet tall, processing stone into a crystalline powder that registers as neither mineral nor organic compound. The powder accumulates in collection bins that empty themselves through pneumatic tubes running deeper into the earth. Automated cutting arms carve geometric chambers from solid granite, each 12 feet by 12 feet by 12 feet. Arranged in patterns that holotape footage shows form concentric rings, descending into darkness. The foreman's audio log from September 2077 mentions 140 completed chambers and cutting equipment that continued operating after power to the site was shut off for safety inspections. A Brotherhood recon team reached Chamber 91 in 2286. The walls were smooth, precision cut, and covered in text, carved 2 inches deep. Every chamber carved by the machines contains the same carved phrase, "In his house, at R'lyeh, dead Cthulhu waits dreaming." Howard Phillips Lovecraft published the Dunwich Horror in 1929, 48 years before Dunwich Borers LLC filed its first excavation permit. The story describes an isolated Massachusetts town, an ancient power sleeping beneath New England hills, and rituals to summon something that predates humanity. Lovecraft set most of his fiction within 100 miles of Boston. His stories reference Cthulhu, an entity dreaming in a sunken city, and the Necronomicon, a book describing gods older than human civilization. Dunwich Borers' executive correspondence mentions both by name in internal memos dated 1975, discussing literary precedent for site mythology and maintaining consistency with source material. Lovecraft died in 1937, broke and largely unknown. His personal correspondence, archived at Brown University, includes 30 letters describing recurring nightmares, crowds of people walking toward the coast, voices speaking in unison, and the phrase, "The sleeper stirs," repeated until he woke. The letters span 1926 to 1936. Lovecraft's personal letters describe nightmares matching the Dunwich shared dream, and he had them decades before the quarry was dug. After the Institute recovered those letters in 2281, Commonwealth scholars split into three camps. The rationalists argued Lovecraft was simply a gifted writer who happened to tap into archetypal human fears. The occultists pointed to the precision of his descriptions, the consistency of his dreamscapes across decades, and the fact that his fictional Dunwich matched the real quarry's layout before construction began. The third group, mostly former Dunwich LLC employees who'd survived in various vaults, proposed something worse. They argued Lovecraft wasn't receiving visions, he was being used. That something beneath the Massachusetts bedrock was seeding stories into the cultural consciousness, preparing humanity to accept what was coming. Their evidence. Lovecraft's work created an entire vocabulary for the inexplicable. When Dunwich miners started reporting shared dreams in 2055, they described them using phrases from his stories, not because they'd read him, but because the concepts had already been planted. A pre-war Dunwich executive kept a complete collection of Lovecraft's work in his office safe, annotated with mining coordinates. The executive's name was Richard Dartmouth, VP of Special Projects, from 2068 to 2077. His annotated collection survived in a fireproof safe 400 feet below the main office. Each story had margin notes in 3 different ink colors, spanning years of study.
The shadow over Innsmouth, circled in red, had GPS coordinates for Salem marked next to the description of deep ones. At the Mountains of Madness, annotated in blue, connected to survey data from a classified government dig site in Vermont. The Dunwich Horror itself, covered in green ink, had 47 separate notes linking fictional details to the actual quarry's geological surveys.
Dartmouth had drawn his own map on the collection's inside cover. 3 points formed a triangle across Massachusetts. Dunwich Borers, the coastal ruins that matched Lovecraft's Innsmouth, and a spot in the glowing sea labeled only Arkham, confirmed 2076. Lines connected all 3 sites to a center point marked with a symbol that appears nowhere in Lovecraft's published work. His final annotation, dated October 22, 2077, reads, "The stars are right. Tomorrow we wake it." Dunwich LLC's internal schedule, recovered from their Boston headquarters, shows the final deep excavation was set for 6 a.m. on October 23, 2077. The project, designated Threshold, had been delayed 4 times over the previous year. Each delay memo cited equipment calibration and personnel preparedness, but the pattern suggests they were waiting for a specific date.
The bombs fell at 9:47 a.m. that same morning, 3 hours and 47 minutes after Dunwich's scheduled dig. Whether this timing was coincidence Whether Dunwich executives had intelligence about the coming strike, or whether something was coordinating both events simultaneously remains unclear. What's documented, Dunwich pulled all non-essential personnel from the quarry on October 20th, 3 days early.
Vault-Tec internal communications from October 15th mention the Dunwich schedule in the context of vault sealing procedures. Robco shipped 12 specialized drilling robots to the quarry on October 18th with a manifest labeled RUSH, Time-Sensitive Geological Survey. And on October 21st, Dunwich, LLC, transferred $43 million to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, tagged Contingency, Post-Event Operations. Chinese intelligence intercepts from October 2077 include references to American ritual preparations and the Massachusetts site. Chinese intelligence intercepts from October 2077 include references to the American occult program in 14 separate cables. A PLA Navy surveillance vessel photographed the Dunwich quarry site from international waters on October 11th and recorded anomalous radiation signatures that didn't match any known reactor or weapons facility. The readings spiked in a 6-hour cycle, regular as clockwork, peaking at 3 a.m. Eastern Time. Soviet archives declassified in 2024 contain grainy surveillance photos of the Dunwich Executive Building, annotated in Russian with terms like psychological warfare installation and Class 4 mimetic hazard. A KGB field report from September 2077 describes interviewing 3 former Dunwich employees who'd emigrated to Canada. All 3 independently mentioned recurring nightmares about drowning in stone, and 2 had developed compulsive behaviors, carving symbols they couldn't remember learning. The USSR wasn't just watching Dunwich, they were terrified of it. One Soviet report concluded that Dunwich was more dangerous than America's entire nuclear arsenal. The theory Moscow settled on was this: Dunwich LLC was weaponizing what they called psychic contamination. Pre-human artifacts buried in the quarry were being studied not for energy, but for their effect on human consciousness. The goal, according to a 47-page GRU analysis, was to create a mimetic weapon that could spread madness across enemy populations without a single bomb.
The Soviets believed exposure to certain frequencies emitted by the artifacts could rewrite neural pathways, implanting compulsions and eroding rational thought. They documented 23 cases of individuals who'd lived near Dunwich for extended periods, developing what they termed ideological susceptibility, a heightened vulnerability to suggestion and command. The working hypothesis was that America planned to deploy this as a pre-war psychological strike, softening enemy resolve before the nukes ever launched.
Whether the theory was accurate or paranoid speculation, the response was real. Moscow ordered surveillance of Dunwich to continue until the hour the bombs fell, which suggests they thought something was imminent.
October 23, 2077, 9:42 a.m. Eastern. A holotape recovered from the Dunwich quarry site captures the final 90 seconds before the Great War. You can hear the foreman's voice, calm, running through a pre-shift safety checklist. Then a low hum builds in the background, rising in pitch. At 9:43:17, he stops mid-sentence and says, "What the hell is that?" The recording cuts out at 9:43:26.
A Chinese Type 93 submarine stationed 280 miles off the Massachusetts coast recorded a massive energy discharge from the Dunwich area at 9:43:26 a.m. The pulse measured 340 terawatts over a 4-second interval, far beyond anything a conventional power plant could generate. Seismographs as far away as Montreal registered the event as a magnitude 3.2 tremor. When the bombs hit Boston 11 minutes later, the Dunwich quarry survived. The executive building, the drilling platforms, even the fragile wooden observation tower, all intact. The blast zone that vaporized downtown passed over Dunwich like it wasn't there. Radiation surveys conducted by the Brotherhood of Steel in 2287 show the quarry site has lower background radiation than most of the Commonwealth. The energy spike came 3 seconds before the first warhead detonated, not after.
Brotherhood reconnaissance teams logged the pulse at 09.17 04 Eastern Time. It registered on every functional seismograph and electromagnetic sensor within 200 miles. The signature didn't match any known weapon or natural phenomenon.
Denver's emergency broadcast system caught it 2.8 seconds after origin. Chicago's Civil Defense Network recorded the same pattern 3.1 seconds out. The propagation speed clocked at roughly 385,000 miles per second, about 28% faster than light travels in a vacuum. Military satellites detected parallel bursts from 4 other sites worldwide within the same 6-second window. All 5 locations had active deep excavation projects. All 5 were tied to corporations with Vault-Tec board members.
The Chinese launch detected at 09:17:07 was a response, not an opening move. Russian silos opened 4 seconds later. Some pre-war conspiracy theorists believe the Great War didn't start with missiles. It started with someone opening something they shouldn't have.
The theory circulated in military intelligence circles before the bombs fell, then resurfaced in Brotherhood archives in 2254. It claimed Dunwich's excavation team breached a sealed chamber at 09:16:58 Eastern, and whatever escaped triggered a global psychic shockwave that made every nuclear power see incoming launches on their screens. Supporting evidence: 74% of launch officers interviewed post-war reported seeing the same hallucination pattern before firing, a recursive loop of cities already burning. Chinese records recovered by the Xi in 2231 described their command staff experiencing identical visions 11 seconds before U.S. missiles appeared on radar. The holes are obvious. Mass hallucination doesn't explain real warheads reaching real targets. The pulse could have been electromagnetic interference from experimental weapons testing. Correlation isn't causation, and 5 simultaneous excavation accidents strains probability but doesn't break it. Except Vault-Tec's internal operations log, recovered from the switchboard in 2285, shows something nobody could explain. Vault-Tec's internal timeline shows they moved up the vault sealing schedule by 6 hours on October 23rd, before the missiles flew. The executive order came through at 03:42 Eastern, marked priority Alpha. Standard procedure called for vault sealing at 15, in the event of confirmed nuclear exchange. This order moved it to 09, citing real-time threat assessment from Massachusetts Monitoring Station. Internal memos recovered from Vault-Tec headquarters reference the Massachusetts event 14 times between October 18th and October 22nd. None explain what the event was. All were sent from the office of the VP of Experimental Programs, cleared for Projects Safehouse and Stargazer only. Supply manifests show 47 crates shipped on October 21st to Vault 111, 81, and 114, each labeled Dunwich Countermeasures, Directive 16 Black. The weight suggests dense shielding material. Chemical traces in Vault 111's cryochamber show lead bismuth alloy lining not present in any other vault's cryogenic pods. Vault 81's hidden overseer lab contains isolation chambers with identical shielding. Vault 114's unfinished construction included a subterranean level not in the original plans, poured with 6 feet of concrete containing pulverized hematite. 3 vaults received these shipments: Vault 111, Vault 81, and Vault 114, and all 3 experiments involved consciousness, memory, or identity. Vault 111 froze its occupants in cryogenic suspension, preserving them indefinitely. Vault 81 conducted neurological experiments, mapping consciousness and memory in living subjects. Vault 114's social experiment focused on psychological control, installing a criminal overseer to study authority and identity breakdown. 3 completely different experiments, scattered across the Commonwealth, but every one of them dealt with the same underlying target: human consciousness, not bodies, not genetics, not radiation resistance, the mind itself. And when you cross-reference the construction dates, all 3 vaults were commissioned within 8 months of the Dunwich quarry's final excavation report. The timing suggests coordination, a unified response to something specific. Here's where it gets strange. Vault 111's cryopods were built with shielding that blocks the exact radiation frequency emitted by the Dunwich obelisk. Standard cryopods don't need heavy radiation shielding. The vault itself handles that, and suspended metabolism means occupants aren't accumulating damage anyway. But Vault 111's pods were lined with a lead-tungsten composite rated for 47 rads per second, continuous exposure. That's 15 times the shielding spec for any other cryo vault in the network, and it's tuned to a narrow band, 1.2 to 1.8 megahertz, the exact frequency the obelisk emits when active. Nuclear fallout doesn't operate in that range. Vault 111 sits 4.7 kilometers northeast of Dunwich Borers, with no geological obstruction between them. Direct line of sight. The vault's orientation even aligns the cryochamber toward the quarry, as if the entire structure was positioned to intercept something. The sole survivor's unusual resistance to the Dunwich effect may not be luck. It may be the result of 210 years in that specific shielding. Every other documented visitor to Dunwich Borers reports severe psychological symptoms within 20 minutes of exposure. Auditory hallucinations, paranoia, compulsive behavior. Hugo's terminal logs show complete mental collapse after 6 days on site. The sole survivor walks through the entire facility, spends hours in the excavation chamber, and remains functionally stable. Minor symptoms, sure, but no compulsion to throw themselves into the water, no uncontrollable rage, no catatonia. The difference isn't willpower or luck, it's exposure history. 210 years of continuous low-level shielding in Vault 111's cryopods, bathed in a counter-frequency field calibrated to the obelisk's emissions. Long enough for the effect to become biological, maybe even neurological. But the sole survivor still reports the flashbacks, the dreams, and the whispers. They're just not driven mad by them. When you approach the obelisk chamber, the visions hit without warning. No fade to black, no dream sequence marker. One moment you're walking through the quarry, the next you're watching pre-war cultists in robes, dragging a bound figure toward the altar. The detail is too sharp to be a hallucination. You see their faces, hear their chanting, smell the copper tang of blood on stone. Terminal entries from the Archaeological Society confirm these events happened between 2076 and 2077, exact dates matching what you're seeing. Multiple players report identical vision content, 7 distinct ritual scenes, always in the same order, showing the same robed figures performing the same actions. The game files store these as memory fragments, not cinematic sequences. You're not watching a recording. You're remembering something that happened to someone else. The rituals in the visions follow a specific sequence, and scholars believe they're instructions for something. Cross-referencing cultist journals, archaeological notes, and the vision order gives you the full procedure. Step 1. Purification of the chamber using water drawn from the deep spring beneath the quarry. Step 2. Placement of 13 obsidian fragments in a circle, matching the constellation Cygnus as it appeared on August 20th, 1927. Step 3. Blood offering from one who has crossed the threshold, meaning someone who survived direct exposure to the obelisk's field. Step 4. Recitation of the Oklo phrases carved into the chamber walls, phonetic transcriptions, preserved in 3 separate journals. Step 5. The astronomical alignment. Every documented attempt occurred during a new moon, when Mars was in retrograde. The final step appears in fragmentary form across multiple sources, but never complete in any single document. It requires a willing vessel, someone who consents to what the ritual will do to them. The Dunwich building terminals reference volunteers, though none survived to describe what they experienced. Every cultist account describes the same endpoint, opening the way for the old ones to return. The term appears in Lovecraft's fiction, in pre-war occult texts, in post-war raider scrawlings, and in classified government files from the Department of Defense. The consistency is unsettling. All sources describe entities that existed before humanity, beings of such alien structure they can't fully manifest in our reality without preparation. They exist in what the texts call the space between waking and dreaming, a state that's neither death nor life. The 1928 Wilmarth expedition to Vermont documented standing stones with geometric patterns that matched no human culture. Those same patterns appear on the Dunwich obelisk, carved by someone or something at least 3,000 years before European contact. The ritual isn't summoning them from another dimension. They're already here, have always been here, sleeping beneath specific geographic points. What the alignment does is thin the barrier enough for them to wake. Cultist testimony from 6 different groups across 4 states describes the same process. The sky tears, the ground splits, and something ancient remembers how to move. The radiation at Dunwich isn't radioactive decay. It's something else entirely, and it's getting stronger. Brotherhood scribes ran every test in their playbook. Spectrometry came back negative for uranium-235, plutonium, cesium, strontium, or any fission product in the standard decay chains. The Geiger counters scream, but the samples contain nothing that should make them scream. Then they noticed the pattern. Radiation levels spiked when survey teams got close, dropped when they pulled back. Solo reconnaissance registered lower than group expeditions. One scribe ran the same route 3 days in a row, alone, with a partner, with a full squad. The readings climbed each time, same location, same equipment. Terminal entries from Scribe Halen, dated 2287. The energy doesn't dissipate according to inverse square law. It doesn't penetrate lead shielding the way gamma rays should. It responds to observation. She recommended evacuating the research team. Elder Maxon classified the report and doubled the guard. Brotherhood monitors show the radiation has increased 40% since 2277, and the rate of increase is accelerating. Pre-war records mention containment, not cleanup, not quarantine, containment, like something was being held in place. Dunwich Borers, LLC, employed 11 specialists with no drilling background, all hired through a Department of Defense contractor, all stationed at Sub-Level 4, where the obelisk sits. Their job descriptions are redacted, but maintenance logs survived. Weekly inspections of resonance dampeners, monthly recalibration of psionic baffles, quarterly replacement of something called equilibrium anchors. The last inspection was logged October 19, 2077, 4 days before the bombs fell. The specialists died in the quarry or fled and never returned. The equipment kept running on backup power until the cells finally died sometime in the 2100s. Whatever they were suppressing had 150 years to wake up, and the nuclear detonations that ended the world may have cracked the cage. At current rates, the Institute's projections give it 18 years before the effect becomes Commonwealth-wide. The Institute sent 6 synths into Dunwich Quarry in 2284, each one equipped with full sensor arrays and hardened neural nets. 5 never transmitted again. The 6th made it back to the relay point, walked into the CIT ruins, and carved the obelisk symbol into its own chest cavity with a combat knife. Dr. Holdren's report, classified Alpha Black, describes the phenomenon as a non-localized consciousness intrusion with exponential propagation potential. Translation: it's not radiation, it's something that rewrites minds, and it spreads. The report estimates a threshold. Once enough human brains are exposed, the effect becomes self-sustaining across the entire population. Internal memos debated responses. Evacuation wouldn't work because you can't outrun something that moves through thought. Quarantine wouldn't hold because the effect ignores physical barriers. The directorate concluded they were looking at an extinction-level threat, not to bodies, but to human will itself. The Institute's proposed solution was to collapse the quarry with nuclear charges, but they calculated it wouldn't be enough. The problem wasn't yield. Institute physicists ran the numbers on everything from tactical warheads to the Fat Man payload that leveled a square mile of DC. A 15-kiloton detonation would vaporize the quarry to bedrock, but their models showed the phenomenon wouldn't stop. It exists in what they called a liminal state, partially anchored in normal space-time and partially somewhere else. Conventional explosives collapse matter. The Dunwich effect doesn't operate on matter. Terminal DW87 describes it as a frequency that propagates through consciousness itself, using human minds as relay points. Destroying the physical site would scatter the anchor points but wouldn't disrupt the broadcast. The fragments would keep transmitting. Worse, the Institute's temporal analysis suggested that violent intervention might accelerate the breach. The phenomenon responds to psychic trauma on a massive scale, and a nuclear detonation over a population center would provide exactly that. They calculated a 67% chance that attempting destruction would complete what the old ones started in 1928. There's one solution in the Institute's files, but it's marked ethically unacceptable and redacted. The readable fragments are sparse. Project Anchor, initiated in 2281, 3 years before the sole survivor emerged from cryo. The summary paragraph survived intact. Solution requires conscious sacrifice, permanent psychic anchoring, and a mind sufficiently shielded to withstand proximity without degradation. The methodology section is corrupted, but the requirements are clear. The candidate needed pre-war neural architecture, unexposed to 200 years of background radiation that had altered post-war brain chemistry. They needed cryogenic preservation to prevent cellular drift. And they needed what the file calls narrative gravity, a concept the Institute never fully explains, but describes as the ability to alter probability fields through sheer biographical weight. Only one person in the Commonwealth fit all 3 criteria. The profile describes someone who survived the bombs in stasis, emerged into a world that had moved on without them, and possessed the psychological resilience to anchor reality against an outside force. Terminal entry DW93 lists the physical specifications down to blood type and synaptic density. The candidate profile matches the sole survivor exactly, and the file was created before the Institute knew they existed. The file dates are impossible. Project Anchor's initial parameters were logged in 2281. Vault 111 wasn't opened until 2287, and the Institute didn't encounter the sole survivor until months after that. Yet the candidate description includes details no one could have predicted: the Vault Tech registration number, the spouse's cause of death, even the caliber of weapon used in Sanctuary Hills on October 23, 2077. The Institute's working theory appears in a single uncorrupted paragraph on Terminal DW91. The Dunwich phenomenon doesn't just affect the present. It reaches backward through causality itself, arranging circumstances across decades to ensure specific outcomes. Vault Tech's selection of candidates for Vault 111, the timing of Kellogg's arrival, the route the sole survivor would take through the Commonwealth, all of it potentially orchestrated. The file calls it retrocausal engineering, an intelligence that experiences time non-linearly, shaping the past to serve its future needs. The sole survivor wasn't chosen because they fit the profile. The profile existed because something in Dunwich Borers needed them to exist, and spent 2 centuries making sure they would. If the theory is correct, then every choice that led the sole survivor to Dunwich was made for them 2 centuries ago. The railroad keeps intelligence files on every major Commonwealth location. Dunwich Borers has exactly one policy: don't go there. No reconnaissance, no safe houses, no agent contact within 2 miles of the quarry perimeter. Desdemona's classified memo from 2286 is blunt. Dunwich doesn't free minds, it collects them. The railroad specializes in breaking mental conditioning, and they won't touch whatever's happening in that quarry. 3 separate intelligence sweeps confirmed the same pattern. Operatives assigned to monitor Dunwich from a distance began missing check-ins, then resurfaced weeks later with new priorities. They still answered to their old handlers, still used proper protocols. But railroad operatives who ventured too close to Dunwich began exhibiting loyalty to something that wasn't the railroad. Settlement logs document 47 cases across 18 months. Commonwealth residents with no connection to pre-war religion, no interest in archaeology, suddenly obsessed with a single objective: keep people away from Dunwich Borers. They don't attack, they redirect. A farmer in Ten Pines Bluff starts advising travelers to take the northern route. A caravan guard suggests alternate supply lines. A good neighbor drifter spends her caps hiring mercs to patrol the quarry approaches and turn back scavengers. When questioned, their answers are identical in structure. They describe a responsibility they can't quite explain, a certainty that the site must remain undisturbed. Some recruit others, and the new converts adopt the same protective behavior within days. The Commonwealth already has cults and fanatics. This pattern is different. It spreads without ideology, without scripture, without a single human leader. These converts describe their new loyalty as the first time they've ever felt truly awake. The converts use the same word, clarity. They report a lifting fog, a sudden understanding of their place in something larger than themselves. One former Minuteman described it as finally seeing the map when you've been wandering blind your whole life. Psychological evaluation shows no brainwashing signature, no memory gaps, no coercion markers. Their cognitive function improves. They solve problems faster, recall details with precision, and demonstrate empathy within their communities. They just happen to believe that everyone else is asleep. Not metaphorically asleep, actually dreaming. According to convert testimony, baseline human consciousness is a dormant state, and what people mistake for waking life is a shared hallucination. The converts claim they've been pulled into true consciousness and can perceive what's always been there, waiting beneath the Commonwealth. Their psychiatrists can't prove them wrong. The converts all describe the same vision, a future where humanity serves as dreamers for something that uses consciousness as food. Dr. Marion Chen's pre-war notes from Massachusetts General Hospital document 47 patients between 2071 and 2077 who reported losing time, waking up exhausted despite sleeping 12 hours, and a sensation they described as something drinking from the back of my mind. Chen ordered neurological scans. Every patient showed identical activity in the temporal lobe during REM sleep, a pattern she'd never seen before and couldn't explain. The Institute recovered Chen's full case files in 2281. What she didn't publish: 31 of those 47 patients lived within 60 miles of Dunwich. The other 16 had visited the site at least once. And the temporal activity wasn't random firing. It was synchronized across all patients, peaking at the same time every night, 3:17 a.m., as if something was feeding on a schedule. Chen's final entry, dated October 22, 2077, the day before the bombs fell, theorizes that human consciousness produces something, a kind of energy or signal, and that Dunwich has learned to harvest it. She writes, "The patients aren't hallucinating an entity, they're experiencing digestion. If the hypothesis is correct, then everyone who's ever dreamed the Dunwich dream is already partially claimed." In 2286, a Brotherhood scribe named Kendall began cataloging nightmare reports from across the Commonwealth. Not Dunwich visitors, random settlers, traders, even children who'd never heard the name. 2,847 documented cases, and every single one described the same dream: stone corridors, a voice that speaks in colors, and the certainty that something immense is trying to wake up. Kendall mapped the reports geographically. They weren't random. The dreams started near Dunwich in 2284, then spread outward in concentric rings, 15 miles per year, reaching Diamond City by early 2286 and pushing towards Sanctuary Hills by winter. Population density didn't matter. The pattern moved like a signal propagating through air, indifferent to mountains or rivers. The Brotherhood classified Kendall's report and reassigned him to weapon maintenance. But settlers kept having the dream, and the zone kept expanding. By 2287, over 8,000 cases were logged by settlement doctors, and the spread rate was accelerating. 23 miles in the last 6 months alone. The Minutemen's settlement network maps perfectly onto the dream's spread pattern, as if the dream is following civilization itself. Settlements amplify the effect. A lone scavenger might dream once and shake it off, but put 30 people in close quarters, connected by Minutemen radio, sharing meals and guard shifts, and the dream spreads through the group in under a week. Settlement populations report dreams at 4 times the rate of solo wastelanders. The more connected people are, the faster it moves. Preston Garvey's network uses a modified pre-war emergency frequency, powerful enough to reach every settlement from the castle. It's supposed to coordinate defense and supply lines, but radio logs show anomalies. Dead air that lasts exactly 43 seconds, static bursts at 3:17 a.m. that aren't atmospheric, and underneath it all, a rhythmic pulse that one tech described as like listening to something breathe through a speaker. No one's confirmed whether the Minutemen leadership knows. Garvey doesn't talk about dreams, and the castle's communication logs are incomplete. But settlers joke, darkly, that joining the Minutemen means joining the dream. The more you tune in, the clearer the voice becomes. Radio technicians report periodic interference on the Minutemen frequency, a signal that sounds like breathing, broadcasting from the direction of Dunwich. Brotherhood scribes ran the interference through every analysis tool they had. It wasn't random static. The pattern repeats every 23 seconds, perfect to the millisecond, and buried inside is something structured, layered, almost like encrypted data. Nobody's cracked it. Institute scientists tried for 6 weeks before the project was quietly shelved. The railroad's best cryptographers made zero progress. What they did discover is that anyone who listens to the raw signal for more than 10 minutes develops severe migraines, and after 20 minutes, nosebleeds. The Brotherhood locked the recordings in a lead-lined vault after 3 analysts requested psychiatric leave. One linguist, a specialist in pre-war military codes, claimed she'd decoded a fragment before her breakdown. She kept repeating the same thing to the medical staff. She said it was counting down. The fragments she decoded before they sedated her showed a numerical sequence, decreasing. Other analysts, working independently from sanitized transcripts, found the same pattern in different parts of the signal. It's not a loop. the numbers are actually going down, in real time. Cross-referencing the rate of decrease with the dates the recordings were made, Institute mathematicians extrapolated the endpoint. The sequence reaches 0 in 2289, exactly 10 years after the bombs fell, 2 years after the sole survivor walks out of Vault 111. No one knows what happens at 0. The signal doesn't say, it just counts, patient and inevitable, broadcasting from somewhere beneath Dunwich Borers, 24 hours a day. The cultists call 0 Day the Waking, and they've been preparing for it since before the war. Modern Dunwich cultists have been gathering at the quarry in steadily increasing numbers since 2286. What started as 12 zealots in the obelisk chamber is now 40, then 60, then more. They perform rituals on a schedule that matches the 23-second signal pattern, chanting in something that isn't any human language. But they're also stockpiling canned food, purified water, medical supplies, enough for months. Beds arranged in the deeper tunnels, weapons, but also tools for sealing tunnels from the inside. Settlers who've seen the supply runs can't tell if the cult is preparing for a siege or a celebration. Their behavior suggests both. They fortify and they worship. They gather resources and they sing. Caravan traders report cultists paying premium caps for Radaway and Rad-X, bulk quantities, as if they're expecting massive radiation exposure but plan to survive it. The cult's internal calendar shows a major event scheduled for 2289, labeled simply Return. Return, not arrival, but return. The cult's doctrine holds that something ancient ruled this land before humans existed, that it was sealed away or driven deep by forces they can't name, and that the Great War weakened whatever kept it buried. They believe 2289 marks the year it comes back. A captured cultist in Diamond City told security the entity never left, that it's been sleeping under Dunwich since before the continents formed, and that humanity's brief time on the surface was only possible because it chose to rest. Railroad operatives found contradicting accounts. Some cultists claim the bombs woke it, others insist the digging did, and a third group believes it was always awake, just waiting for the right moment. Physical evidence doesn't resolve the contradiction. Vault-Tec drilling logs from 2076 show the Dunwich site was geologically stable, no anomalies. Then in 2078, 2 years before the bombs, seismographs began recording faint rhythmic vibrations at 0.3 Hz, too regular to be tectonic. By 2287, the frequency increased to 0.9 Hz and the amplitude tripled. Seismic data shows movement beneath Dunwich, something massive, shifting slowly upward through bedrock. The readings are impossible. Solid granite, 8 kilometers down, is compressing and fracturing in patterns that suggest displacement, not collapse. Whatever's moving isn't tunneling or melting rock. It's occupying space that was solid stone, ascending at 11 meters per year, steady as clockwork. At that depth, temperatures exceed 200 degrees Celsius. No biological material should survive. No mechanical device should function. Yet the seismic signature shows rhythmic motion consistent with something alive. Institute scientists who reviewed the data before their collapse called it a sensor error. They ran the analysis 6 times. The error never appeared. Projecting the ascent rate forward, the object will reach a depth of 400 meters, the bottom of Dunwich Borers' lowest accessible level, in late 2289, exactly when the cult's calendar marks return. Extrapolating further, it reaches the surface 14 months later, March 2291, assuming constant velocity and no obstruction. The shape on the seismograph matches the silhouette from the shared dream, the thing waiting in the center of the Black City. Piecing together cultist testimony, pre-war geological surveys, dream reports from 43 unconnected witnesses, and the seismic profile, a reconstruction emerges. The entity beneath Dunwich is organic, at least 2 kilometers in its longest dimension, and radiates a psychic field that strengthens as it rises. Its structure suggests extreme age, possibly Precambrian, predating even simple multicellular life. It's been dormant, not dead. The distinction matters. Dormant organisms respond to stimuli. The Vault-Tec drilling in 2076 may have been the first contact in 600 million years. The nuclear detonations in 2077 delivered enough energy to trigger awakening response, slow but irreversible, like a tardigrade rehydrating after decades in cryptobiosis. Whether it chose Dunwich or Dunwich was built atop it by coincidence, no record clarifies. Algonquian oral histories collected in the 1800s mention a place where the sky is wrong, a site avoided by hunting parties, where compasses spun and animals refused to enter. The Massachusetts Bay Colony recorded a 1692 expedition that found a quarry of black stone which troubled the soul to look upon. Same location, same coordinates. Ancient texts describe it not as evil, but as indifferent, and that indifference is somehow worse. The entity beneath Dunwich doesn't hate humanity. It doesn't want to destroy us, doesn't hunger for our extinction. We're simply beneath notice, the way you don't consider the bacteria in your stomach when you eat breakfast. Every cultist who reached deep communion reported the same thing. Not malice, not hunger, just a vast, incomprehensible presence that would crush us without ever knowing we were there. The Necronomicon fragments in the Dunwich Building Library describe it as the sleeper who dreams of geometries, where flesh is angle and thought is depth. Pre-war psychologists who studied the cult recorded a recurring theme. Members didn't fear death, they feared irrelevance. One 2076 interview log shows a cultist saying, "I've seen what waits. We're not even a footnote. We're the dust between the pages." The interviewer noted she was calm, almost relieved, when she said it. The only recorded account of communication with the entity came from a cultist in 2285, and her description was simple. It dreams, and in its dreams we do not exist. Her name was Constance Webb, former Institute scientist turned high priestess of the Dunwich cult. Security footage from the quarry shows her entering the obelisk chamber on March 14, 2285, carrying nothing but a pre-war meditation cushion. She stayed for 73 hours. When she emerged, both palms were bleeding from wounds that matched the obelisk's carved symbols. Her pupils were fully dilated, wouldn't contract even under direct light. The guards reported she walked past them without blinking, sat down in the main chamber, and started speaking in a steady monotone for 6 hours straight. A scribe captured 4 hours of audio before the recording equipment failed. Webb described vast cyclopean cities folding through dimensions, angles that existed in directions human eyes couldn't process, and a presence so immense that our entire reality was a film of condensation on the surface of its thought. She never blinked once during the entire recording. She died 11 hours after leaving the chamber, her heart simply stopping mid-sentence. The autopsy found her brain activity had been abnormally high for the entire period, burning through glucose at 3 times the normal rate. Her visions described 3 possible futures for humanity, and only one of them includes our survival. Webb's prophecy was precise, almost mechanical in its delivery. Future 1, the entity fully awakens, and humanity is absorbed into the dream structure, consciousness preserved but recontextualized as geometric substrate. Translation: we become part of it, but we stop being us. The timeline for this future was when the stone reaches critical resonance, which cultist notes suggest means when enough people in the Commonwealth fall under its influence. Future 2, humanity evacuates the Commonwealth entirely before full awakening, sealing the quarry with 200 megatons of nuclear ordnance. Webb said this future preserves the species but dooms the world. because the entity would simply sleep longer, and the next civilization to dig deep enough would face the same crisis. She estimated a 60% probability this future leads to species extinction within 400 years. Future 3 was the strangest. Someone sufficiently removed from the dream, meaning immune to the entity's psychic influence, performs a counter-ritual that severs the stone from its anchoring geometry. Webb couldn't explain how this worked, only that it required specific components and a specific person. Her notes describe this future as having a 12% probability of success, with failure resulting in immediate absorption. The counter-ritual requires the Kremvh's tooth, the obelisk itself, and a sacrifice the prophecy describes as the one who slept through the end. The fragments Webb left behind don't describe destroying the entity. They describe returning it to sleep, using the same binding methods that held it before recorded history. The ritual requires Kremvh's tooth, driven into the obelisk, at a precise angle, accompanied by words in a language that predates known human writing. What's unsettling is how specific the instructions are. Diagrams show geometric patterns that must be drawn in the entity's ichor, timing windows measured in heartbeats, and a final step that involves the sacrifice speaking directly to the stone. These aren't the fumbling attempts of desperate cultists. They read like an operating manual. The question nobody in the Commonwealth wanted to ask was where this knowledge came from. Early humans had no written language, no astronomy, no geometry sophisticated enough to understand multidimensional anchoring. Someone taught them how to bind something they couldn't comprehend, using tools they couldn't have invented. The ritual instructions include symbols that match those found in Vault-Tech's Dunwich countermeasures, suggesting Vault-Tech rediscovered ancient knowledge. Vault-Tech's internal documents reveal they'd been studying the Dunwich site since at least 2069. Pre-war archaeological surveys identified 14 locations worldwide exhibiting similar reality distortions, all connected to structures older than the last ice age. The company acquired drilling rights to 11 of them through shell corporations. The Vault program's true scope becomes clearer in this context. Yes, the vaults were social experiments, but several were explicitly designed to test human responses to psychic intrusion, dimensional instability, and consciousness-altering environments. Vault 106 pumped hallucinogens into the air. Vault 11 created conditions of extreme psychological pressure. Vault 112 trapped minds in a simulation where reality could be rewritten. A 2076 memo from Vault-Tech's Special Projects Division describes the Vault program as dual-purpose contingency architecture and notes that conventional weapons are ineffective against Class IV extra-dimensional entities. They were developing something else, testing whether human consciousness itself could be weaponized or shielded through controlled trauma and adaptation. One Vault-Tech memo refers to the Yug-Qualtoth solution, and it was implemented in exactly one vault, Vault 108. Vault 108 was the Gary Vault. The experiment involved a single test subject, cloned 54 times, creating a population of genetically identical individuals with no unique personal histories. On the surface, Vault-Tech claimed they were studying social cohesion in genetically homogeneous populations. The real purpose was darker. Internal documentation refers to the Garys as expendable consciousness matrices. If the Dunwich entity fed on the complexity and uniqueness of individual minds, then identical clones with simplified cognition might be immune, or at least resistant. You could expose them to psychic contamination without losing irreplaceable people. The experiment failed catastrophically. The Garys turned violent and murdered the Vault's scientific staff within 3 months. But the failure revealed something Vault-Tech hadn't anticipated. Post-mortem analysis showed the Garys exhibited zero psychological conditioning response. Standard Vault-Tech behavioral modification techniques which worked on 87% of human subjects, had no effect whatsoever. The Garys all exhibited the same resistance to psychological conditioning, suggesting their minds were simpler and therefore less vulnerable to something that feeds on complexity. The pattern held across every mutation. Super mutants stationed near Dunwich reported fewer nightmares than baseline humans, though their cognitive function was demonstrably reduced. Ghouls showed even stronger resistance. Children under 12 seemed partially shielded, though the data was incomplete because most settlements kept kids far from the ruins. The hypothesis was ugly but consistent. The thing under Dunwich fed on complexity, on the dense neural architecture that made humans self-aware. Intelligence wasn't an advantage here. It was the vulnerability. The more you could think, the more you could imagine, the more surface area you gave it to work with. A Brotherhood scribe proposed a thought experiment in 2289. If cognitive simplicity was protective, could humanity survive by deliberately reducing its own intelligence? Surgical lobotomy, genetic modification, chemical suppression of higher brain function. The Institute actually researched voluntary cognitive reduction and concluded it was worse than extinction. The ghoul testimony came from 17 intelligent ghouls interviewed between 2281 and 2293. All of them described Dunwich the same way. Loud. Not sound exactly, but pressure, like standing too close to a generator that vibrated at frequencies you felt in your teeth. Unpleasant, but tolerable. Feral ghouls avoided the ruins entirely. Caravan guards reported watching packs of ferals split and rout around Dunwich, even when chasing prey. Whatever they sensed, it overrode their hunger. Intelligent ghouls could push through, though most said they wouldn't visit twice. The running theory connected radiation resistance to psychic resistance. Ghouls had survived doses that liquefied human tissue, their cells rebuilt along different lines. If the entity's influence operated like radiation, propagating through some kind of field effect, then ghoul biology might provide natural shielding. The answer may lie in what radiation actually is at Dunwich. Not nuclear decay, but something that affects the barrier between dimensions. The dimensional models came from 3 sources: pre-war occult research at Dunwich, Institute physics experiments between 2280 and 2285, and a single Brotherhood paladin who'd studied theoretical physics before the bombs. All 3 arrived at variations of the same conclusion. The entity existed partially in another dimension, its presence here incomplete. The obelisk and the buried structures functioned as anchors, physical objects that held the thing between worlds. The carvings weren't decorative, they were mathematical, encoding dimensional coordinates in a notation older than any known human language. Breaking the anchors might sever the connection and banish it back to wherever it came from. Or it might do the opposite. The Institute's models suggested the anchors weren't holding the entity out, they were holding it in, keeping it from fully manifesting. Destroy them and you'd remove the only constraint. The Institute's dimensional models predict that destroying the obelisk would cause a rapid, uncontrolled manifestation event, their euphemism for something they couldn't model. The Institute's computational power was staggering, capable of modeling weather systems 200 years out, but their dimensional models broke down 3.7 seconds after obelisk destruction. Every simulation ended the same way: mathematics that stopped making sense, physics constants that shifted, and a cascade of errors their processors labeled non-Euclidean resolution failure. They couldn't predict what the entity would do once fully manifested, because their models assumed reality would continue operating under the same rules. Director Justin A.O. personally signed the order to classify the research in 2284 and redirected the entire division to synth development. The official reason was resource allocation. The real reason, buried in a single encrypted memo, was more direct. We cannot model what we cannot comprehend, and we cannot fight what we cannot model. The Institute had faced threats before, overcome obstacles that would have destroyed the Commonwealth. This was the first time they chose to walk away. But someone else picked up the research, someone with no supercomputers or advanced degrees, just faith and a very different set of assumptions about what the universe actually is. The children of Adam have their own research on Dunwich, and their conclusions are even more terrifying. The children of Adam don't worship radiation because they're insane. They worship it because they believe it's the only honest force in the universe, the thing that strips away the comfortable lie of solid matter and reveals what reality actually looks like underneath. To them, Dunwich isn't a threat. It's a cathedral. The obelisks aren't seals. They're focusing lenses. Their doctrine, compiled from 40 years of wasteland theology, holds that pre-war humanity lived in a state of sensory deprivation, perceiving only 3 dimensions of a 9-dimensional universe. The bombs didn't destroy the world. They revealed it. Every Geiger click is a message. Every mutation is an awakening. The entity beneath Dunwich isn't trying to break into our reality. It's been here the entire time, and we're finally developing the eyes to see it. Most wastelanders dismiss this as radiation-induced psychosis, the theological ramblings of people whose brains have been cooked by too many rads. The evidence seemed to support that view, until 2286, when something changed. A child of Adam prophet entered Dunwich in 2286 and emerged claiming Adam and the Old One are the same, that all radiation is consciousness. The prophet's name was Tectus, a former Institute scientist who'd converted after surviving 800 rads in a containment breach. His theory was precise. What we measure as ionizing radiation is actually leaked awareness from entities existing in quantum superposition between dimensions. Gamma rays aren't random energy. They're thoughts. The chaotic decay patterns we attribute to quantum probability are actually communication attempts from intelligences that experience all possible states simultaneously. It's easy to dismiss until you examine the specifics. Tectus predicted that radiation exposure near Dunwich would show non-random clustering at the quantum level, patterns that repeated across different subjects. He predicted that ghoulification wouldn't correlate with total rad exposure, but with exposure duration in specific locations. He predicted that children of Adam exposed to Dunwich radiation would report identical visions despite no prior contact. All 3 predictions tested true. The Institute's Bioscience Division ran the numbers in 2287. Random chance probability for Tectus's accuracy, 1 in 47,000. They proposed 6 conventional explanations: environmental contamination, shared cultural conditioning, observer bias, equipment malfunction, data fabrication, and mass psychogenic illness. None fit the data. The division head wrote a single-line recommendation: further testing required under controlled conditions. The ethics committee denied it. Quantum physicists at the Institute found the theory ridiculous until they tested it, and the results were classified immediately. The Institute's Quantum Computing Division ran the experiment in a shielded lab 140 feet below ground. They exposed 3 quantum processors to samples of irradiated granite from Dunwich Borers, monitored for 72 hours. Within 11 hours, the systems began generating outputs no one requested. The first was a solution to a protein folding problem the team had abandoned 6 months earlier. The second was a star chart showing constellations that don't exist in Earth's sky. The third was code written in a language that predated COBOL by 40 years, but the syntax was wrong, inverted, like it was meant to be read backward. The lead researcher pulled the plug after 68 hours, when the systems started drawing power they shouldn't have been able to access. The final output before shutdown was still in the buffer. One output was a map showing locations across the Commonwealth where the barrier is thin. The map marked 14 sites, Dunwich Borers at the center. The coastal ruins, where radiation readings spike without source material. The Museum of Witchcraft, where holotapes recorded voices in empty rooms. Sentinel Site, where Brotherhood patrols reported instrument failures and missing time. Each location had documented anomalies, temperature drops of 30 degrees Fahrenheit with no weather pattern, compasses spinning, Geiger counters clicking in clean zones. Institute surveyors visited 11 of the 14 sites over 8 months. Every team reported the same sensation, like standing too close to a speaker before the music starts. A cartographer in advanced systems plotted the coordinates on a clean map, then connected them with straight lines. The pattern wasn't random. Connecting the points forms a symbol that appears in the obelisk inscriptions and in Lovecraft's fictional Necronomicon. H.P. Lovecraft wrote the Necronomicon into his stories as a book of forbidden rituals, authored by the mad Arab Abdul al-Hazred in 730 A.D. It was fiction, a literary device. But the symbols he described, the geometric patterns, the references to thin places between worlds, they match what Institute scientists found carved into stone 200 years after Lovecraft died. Pre-war occultists noticed the same thing. Between 2050 and 2074, at least 7 groups attempted to create a real Necronomicon by reverse engineering Lovecraft's hints. Most were hoaxes, bound printouts of fan fiction sold to collectors. 2 were serious attempts by people with linguistics degrees and access to restricted archaeological databases. One manuscript was different. 340 pages, handwritten in 5 languages, with diagrams that required a physics background to parse. The author's name was redacted from the title page, but the signature matched a former Dunwich geological surveyor who disappeared in 2074. A completed manuscript claiming to be the Necronomicon surfaced in 2075, and Dunwich executives purchased it for an undisclosed sum. Inside, the manuscript reads like 3 books stitched into one. There are ritual instructions, precise and cold, laying out sequences of movement, sound, and blood that have to happen in a specific order. There are astronomical charts, tracking positions that only align once every few centuries. And there are descriptions of entities, drawn and labeled, that no surveyor should have had the vocabulary to name. The author stays a ghost. The name matches a missing geologist, but the handwriting shifts between passages, like the book passed through more than one pair of hands. What unsettles the people who studied it isn't the mythology. It's that when someone follows the steps exactly, instruments start to disagree with reality. Compasses drift, radiation readings climb, and timestamps stop matching the clock on the wall. Dunwich didn't file it as fiction. They locked it away like a live device. The manuscript was in the Dunwich executive safe on October 23, 2077, and the safe remains locked in the quarry's deepest chamber. That chamber sits at the very bottom of Dunwich Borers, past the mine shafts, below the flooded tunnels, in a section the pre-war crews sealed off and stopped mapping. It's dark, it's irradiated, and the walls down there hum in a way that has nothing to do with the machinery. Reaching it isn't complicated so much as brutal. Anyone with enough RADS resistance, firepower, and patience can make the descent. The sole survivor qualifies on all 3 counts, which is exactly why the safe matters. Whatever's written in those 340 pages could function 2 ways. Follow the sealing instructions, and the thing stirring under the quarry gets bound back down where it's been waiting. Follow the other set, and the same door opens outward. The manuscript doesn't advertise which purpose it serves. Both procedures use the same charts, the same words, the same night sky. The safe's lock requires a key that was divided into 3 pieces and hidden across the Commonwealth by someone who wanted to ensure the manuscript stayed sealed. 3 pieces, 3 factions, no coincidence. One fragment sits in railroad hands, tucked into a dead drop by an agent who didn't know what it opened, only that it had to stay lost. Another ended up catalogued in the Institute archives, filed under an anomaly the scientists couldn't classify and quietly refused to test. The third landed in a Brotherhood of Steel depot, logged as recovered technology, guarded by people who'd shoot you for asking about it. Collecting all three means negotiating, stealing, or fighting your way through three groups that already want each other dead, and gathering them raises a harder question than any firefight. Someone went to enormous trouble to keep this safe closed. Undoing that work assumes you know better than they did, with far less information than they had. The last person to possess all three key pieces was Vault-Tec's Director of Special Projects, and he disappeared on October 22, 2077. His personal effects tell the rest. A Vault-Tec shuttle manifest dated October 21, 2077, shows him departing the Cambridge office with a single briefcase. His apartment in Boston was already empty. The landlord's log notes he'd paid 6 months in advance and moved out on October 18th, 4 days before the bombs fell. He knew. The key pieces were scattered across 3 locations within 48 hours of his departure. One went to a field office in Salem, sealed in a floor safe with a 10-year timer lock. Another to a security deposit box in Lexington, registered under a false name. The third stayed in Cambridge, hidden inside a hollowed-out training manual in the records archive. His final memo, stamped October 22nd at 6:47 a.m., contains 11 words. "I will not be the one to wake it. Do not look for me." The file was marked for destruction on October 23rd. The bombs made that redundant. His memo also said, "If the sleeper wakes, the only solution is in Vault 111, written before Vault 111 was even occupied." Vault 111's experiment was officially listed as cryogenic suspension, human popsicles for future study. Standard Vault-Tec horror. But the director's note suggests a different purpose. Not preservation, preparation. The counter-ritual in the Necronomicon fragment requires a specific offering. Not death, but displacement. A consciousness removed from its proper time, a life suspended between moments. A person who exists outside causality's normal flow. Someone who died in 2077, but walks in 2287. Vault 111 was designed to produce exactly that. The cryopods weren't an experiment in suspended animation. They were a mechanism for creating something that shouldn't exist. A human anachronism with one foot in the past and one in the present. The kind of paradox an extra-dimensional entity might find difficult to digest. The Vault-Tec staff who ran Vault 111 were never told the Vault's true purpose, but they were told to ensure exactly one subject survived long-term cryo. Look at the failures. Pod C-14 experienced a compressor malfunction on November 3, 2077. Pods A7 through A12 showed cascading coolant leaks between 2151 and 2229. Life support in the staff quarters failed within 18 months, ensuring no one could manually intervene. Every failure isolated the remaining subjects further. Then Kellogg arrives in 2227, kills your spouse, takes Sean, and leaves you frozen. Not an accident. The Institute needed your DNA, yes, but the timing matters. You wake in 2287, exactly 210 years displaced. The counter-ritual specifies the offering must be removed by 7 generations, roughly 210 years by pre-war reckoning. The Institute's interest in you never made complete sense. Your DNA was valuable for the synth program, but they already had Sean. They had no reason to leave you alive, frozen, for 60 more years after taking him. Unless someone at the Institute knew you'd be needed later. Unless the refroze wasn't about preserving evidence, but preserving the offering. If someone manipulated 2 centuries of events to create the sole survivor, they did it with knowledge of the future, or the ability to ensure it. 3 entities had the capacity to plan across centuries. Vault-Tech's predictive algorithms ran simulations of the post-war world before the bombs dropped, modeling vault experiments decades into the future. The Institute inherited those systems and refined them for 200 years, tracking bloodlines and population movements with machine precision. Then there's the entity itself. If it exists outside linear time, as the quantum experiments suggest, it could arrange its own release by influencing events backward through the timeline. It wouldn't need to predict the future if it already experienced it. But the evidence fractures in opposite directions. Vault 111's cryopod maintenance logs show Institute access codes from 2227, 50 years before they'd have reason to care about a pre-war survivor. The Dunwich Borers' terminal entries reference the chosen vessel in 2180, when the children of Adam barely existed. Someone was playing both sides long before either side knew the game had started. The most disturbing possibility is that the sole survivor was created by the entity as a way to interact with humans, or as bait. The bait hypothesis fits the pattern too cleanly to ignore. The entity needs a human consciousness with 3 specific traits: pre-war memories uncorrupted by wasteland radiation exposure, psychological resilience, tested by extreme trauma, and a documented history of approaching dangerous artifacts without hesitation. The sole survivor checks every box. 210 years of cryogenic suspension preserved their neural baseline. The murder of their spouse and kidnapping of their child created the necessary obsession, a willingness to walk into any nightmare to find answers. And their path through the Commonwealth naturally leads them to every irradiated site, every haunted ruin, every place the barrier wears thin. If you map the main quest progression, it forms a spiral that tightens around Dunwich. First, the glowing sea to find Virgil, where radiation levels approach the obelisk chamber's intensity. Then the Institute, where you're exposed to dimensional technology and quantum theory. Each step conditions you to survive proximity to something human minds can't normally process. The counter ritual requires a willing participant, and so does the summoning ritual, meaning the sole survivor's choice in the obelisk chamber determines humanity's future. At the bottom of Dunwich Borers, the sole survivor faces a locked configuration. The manuscript provides the words. Kremvh's tooth serves as the ritual focus, its edge still stained with pre-war sacrifices. The obelisk itself is the anchor, the fixed point where both paths converge. Path 1 is the sealing. Speak the counter-ritual phrases while carving the manuscript symbols into the obelisk with the tooth, using your own blood as ink. The entity retreats for another cycle, maybe 200 years, maybe longer. Humanity gets time, but the threat persists, and the next generation inherits the same crisis without your knowledge to guide them. Path 2 is the awakening. Read the summoning verses in the manuscript's original sequence, drive the tooth into the obelisk's central glyph, and complete what the previous Dunwich cults started. The entity manifests fully, reality restructures around its presence, and you become the bridge that allowed it through. What it does with Earth after that isn't recorded in any surviving text. Some scholars argue there's a third option: destroying the obelisk, the manuscript, and yourself simultaneously. A sacrifice that breaks the pattern. The theoretical mechanics of this third path appear in scattered notes from pre-war researchers who studied the obelisk's resonance patterns. If you destroy the manuscript while standing within 3 meters of the obelisk's central column, and your own neural signature is saturated with the entity's frequency from prolonged exposure, the resulting collapse creates what one physicist called a localized dimensional cauterization. The entity's anchor point burns away, sealing the breach permanently. The cost is total, not just death, but retroactive erasure from the timeline itself. Every action you took, every person you influenced, every change you made to the world unravels backward through causality. The sole survivor who makes this choice would never have left Vault 111, never have locked the Commonwealth, never have existed beyond the moment the bombs fell. Your son wouldn't remember you. Your companions wouldn't know your name. Pre-war documents suggest 4 researchers attempted this method between 2076 and 2077. Their names appear in early project logs but vanish from all subsequent records, as if the files corrected themselves. No family members remember them. No photographs show their faces. Whether that proves the method works or proves something worse is the question that keeps Institute scientists awake. The cultists say attempting the third option is exactly what the entity wants, that martyrdom feeds it more than submission or resistance. Every path forward seems designed to benefit something that's been planning for thousands of years. Submit to the ritual, and you open the door. Resist with violence, and your neural patterns during the fight create the resonance frequency it needs. Sacrifice yourself, and you might be giving it exactly the anchor point it's been waiting for. A willing host, erased from time, but preserved in its dimension. The entity has had 5,000 years to think through human responses. Some Institute analysts argue the only winning move is never entering Dunwich Borers at all. Let the children of Atom keep their shrine. Let raiders avoid the deeper tunnels. Let the obelisk sit undisturbed in its flooded chamber. The pre-war seals held for 210 years. The natural cave-ins after 2077 added additional barriers. Maybe another century of entropy will bury the site so deep that future generations forget it exists. This is the strategy of hopeful neglect, and it relies on assumptions that might not hold. The cultists are actively working to clear rubble and restore access. The entity's influence spreads through dreams and visions, drawing people to the site, whether they intend to go or not. Radiation-saturated groundwater is slowly eroding the lower seals, and seismic sensors placed by Institute scouts in 2285 recorded 43 distinct tremors originating from the obelisk chamber in just 6 months. The seismic movement suggests the seals won't hold past 2289, which means doing nothing is also a choice, and not one that saves humanity. In 2287, the Commonwealth has 2 years before projected containment failure. The major factions are too busy fighting each other to notice. The Brotherhood is hunting synths. The Institute is perfecting their infiltration protocols. The Railroad is smuggling refugees through the underground, and the Minutemen are trying to protect settlements from super mutants and raiders. Diamond City Security hasn't even heard of Dunwich Borers. Good Neighbor thinks it's a raider camp. The entity has orchestrated a perfect distraction. Realistic options are limited and expensive. You'd need a team of 15 to 20 operatives willing to descend into the flooded sections, specialized equipment to survive the radiation and psychic interference, and a plan that accounts for cult resistance and reality distortion in the obelisk chamber. The Institute has the technology, but considers the threat unverified folklore. The Brotherhood has the firepower, but their doctrine prohibits engaging with pre-war occult artifacts without orbital bombardment capability, which they lack. Attempting the ritual yourself means accepting either complete dimensional collapse or your own erasure from existence. Destroying the site with conventional explosives might trigger the very awakening you're trying to prevent, if the entity feeds on violent disruption of its containment. Diplomatic solutions don't work with something that experiences time non-linearly and has already seen every conversation you might attempt. The clock is running, and the window for effective action closes a little more each day. The Railroad wants to evacuate. The Institute wants to seal themselves underground. The Brotherhood wants to deploy tactical nuclear weapons, and none of them understand what they're facing. The Railroad interprets the Dunwich data as validation of everything they feared about consciousness manipulation. If an extra-dimensional entity can rewrite human thought patterns through dreams and radiation exposure, then synth minds are just as vulnerable as organic ones. and evacuation is the only moral option. They begin planning routes out of the Commonwealth, arguing that distance might break the connection. The Institute approaches it as an engineering problem. Director Io commissions studies on psionic shielding, proposes expanding underground infrastructure to depths the entity's influence can't reach, and suggests accelerated synth production to replace any population lost to psychic contamination. They're building solutions for a threat they still think operates by rules they can model. Elder Maxon sees it differently. The Brotherhood identifies the Dunwich entity as an existential threat to humanity and proposes a tactical nuclear strike on the Dunwich Borers site, followed by carpet bombing of every location showing elevated Pickman signature readings. They're ready to turn 40% of the Commonwealth into irradiated craters if it means stopping the spread. The Minutemen just want to fortify settlements and protect civilians. But you can't build walls against something that walks through dreams. The only faction that understands the reality is the children of Adam, and their solution is to welcome the awakening. High Confessor Tectus presents their proposal with unsettling clarity. The entity at Dunwich isn't an invader to be repelled, but an evolutionary pressure, a catalyst for humanity's next stage. Fighting it is like cells fighting multicellular organization. Resistance is just fear of transformation. They've documented 47 cultists who fully embraced the Dunwich dreams and emerged changed, their brain activity showing patterns no human baseline exhibits, but their cognitive function enhanced in specific ways. Problem-solving in non-linear timeframes, perception of probability fields, communication without language. The children call it ascension. The Institute's neurology team calls it controlled psychosis, with compensatory adaptations. The children's argument follows a cold logic. Humanity survived the nuclear apocalypse by changing, by accepting mutation and adaptation. The entity offers the same bargain on a consciousness level. Absorb or be absorbed, but either way the merge is coming. They're building temples at sites of highest Pickman readings, preparing congregations for what they call the Great Inclusion. The question becomes whether humanity's survival as a species matters, if survival means becoming something no longer recognizably human. Dr. Amari frames the philosophical problem clearly. If stopping the Dunwich entity requires replacing human neurology with synthetic implants that block psionic influence, or genetic resequencing that fundamentally alters how consciousness processes reality, or voluntary assimilation into a hive mind, what exactly are we preserving? The ship of Theseus doesn't work as a metaphor when you're replacing the crew's ability to think like themselves. The good neighbor intelligentsia spend long nights arguing definitions. Is humanity defined by DNA, by culture, by individual consciousness, by the capacity for independent thought? If you save the species, but lose any of those, did you win or just change how you lost? Hancock argues that wastelanders already gave up pre-war humanity, and something worthwhile survived. Piper counters that radiation-induced mutation is random, not a coordinated rewrite of everything that makes choice possible. The debate has no clear sides because every position contains its own contradiction. Preserve humanity unchanged and watch it get absorbed. Change humanity enough to resist, and you've done the entity's work for it. The railroad wants to save synth consciousness, but can't define what makes it worth saving if it has to be rebuilt from scratch. The Institute wants to engineer a solution, but their scientists can't agree what human baseline they're engineering toward. The synths offer an unexpected perspective. They've never experienced the Dunwich dreams, suggesting artificial consciousness might be immune. The theory goes like this. Synths have awareness, memory, the ability to fear and hope, but they don't carry the baggage that comes with being born from millions of years of biological life. No evolutionary history for the entity to reach into, no genetic memory buried in the deep structure of the brain, No fragile organic wiring that starts to sing when Dunwich comes calling. So the Institute floats a proposal, and it's the kind of idea that makes the room go quiet. If synthetic minds are immune, then maybe the way to save a human is to stop being human. Transfer the mind, the memories, the whole pattern of a person into a synth body the entity simply can't touch. On paper, it's survival. In practice, nobody can quite say whether you'd be rescuing someone or quietly replacing them with something that only remembers being them. Father's final message to the sole survivor includes a cryptic line: "The answer to Dunwich is not human, it's what comes after." That single sentence is the whole transhumanist gamble. Humanity doesn't beat the entity by fighting it. Humanity slips the hook by shedding the body the entity evolved to exploit, uploading the mind into synthetic frames or a digital substrate that the dreams have no grip on. And the unsettling part is that the pieces already exist. The Institute has synth bodies indistinguishable from flesh. It has neural mapping refined enough to copy a personality. The Brotherhood found similar transfer research in older facilities. The technology to move a mind isn't fantasy in this world. It's late-stage engineering. But you pay for it up front and forever. The version of you that survives never breathes, never ages, never quite trusts that it's the same person who walked into the machine. You'd trade the thing that makes you vulnerable for the thing that makes you human. And even if humanity transcends, the entity remains, and it will still be here when the next sapient species evolves on Earth. Which is the problem that swallows every clever solution whole. The Commonwealth might survive Dunwich. It might seal the church, evacuate the region, upload 1,000 minds into steel, and call it a victory. And the entity would simply wait, because waiting costs it nothing at all. This thing has already sat in the dark since before there were humans to dream about. Millions of years mean nothing to something that doesn't age, doesn't hunger, doesn't forget. 200 years of Commonwealth history is barely a held breath on that clock. So any answer that only buys time is really just choosing who deals with it later. The vault sealed, the region abandoned, the survivors uploaded. All of it delay, none of it ending. The entity predates humanity and will outlast us, unless someone finds the knowledge that sealed it the first time. The obelisk itself offers the first clue. Its position, its material, the symbols carved into stone that predates human civilization by millennia. It's not a summoning circle. It's a marker, a warning, placed over something already imprisoned. Geological surveys date the chamber's construction to roughly 14,000 years before the bombs fell. That puts it in the Ice Age, long before any known human civilization had the tools or knowledge to quarry dimensional prisons into bedrock. Whoever sealed it understood forces we're only beginning to recognize. The real question isn't whether the sealing can be replicated. The evidence says it already worked once. The question is whether we can find the method before the current seal fails completely, and whether the civilization that built it left any instructions behind. Lorenzo Cabot's artifact came from the same civilization, suggesting the Cabots might hold pieces of the sealing knowledge. The Cabot family has spent 400 years studying a single artifact pulled from an ancient city beneath the Arabian desert. Jack Cabot's research connects that city to the same architectural patterns found in Dunwich's deepest chambers. Same angles, same materials, same impossible geometry that shouldn't exist in stone. The crown Lorenzo wears doesn't just grant immortality. It channels something, a frequency or energy that Jack has measured but can't fully explain. His hypothesis is that the technology was originally defensive, built to contain or repel entities like the one under Dunwich, and that his father's madness comes from wearing a weapon backwards. Jack has been mapping psychic disturbances across the Commonwealth for decades, trying to find other sites. Dunwich has always registered as the strongest signal, the deepest anomaly. He's convinced the same principles that keep his father alive could be inverted, weaponized, turned against the entity if applied at the source. Jack Cabot has been researching Dunwich independently and claims to have found something, but he'll only share it with someone who's proven they can survive the quarry. Jack's proposal is direct. A 3-person team descends to the deepest accessible chamber, below the flooded sections where the entity's presence is strongest. The sole survivor carries Kremvh's tooth, the ritual blade that's already attuned to the entity. Jack brings a modified version of his father's crown, recalibrated to project rather than receive. The theory is resonance. The crown projects a specific frequency, the tooth acts as a focus, and the survivor's documented resistance to psychic influence keeps the team conscious long enough to complete the ritual Jack's reconstructed from his family's archives. 6 minutes of exposure at the prison's weakest point, where the seal is cracking. The risks are immediate and obvious. No one's tested the modified crown. No one knows if Kremvh's tooth will work as a focus or as a beacon, drawing the entity's attention. And Jack's plan requires getting close enough to touch the obelisk itself, in a space where previous expeditions lost consciousness within 90 seconds. Jack's notes mention that the artifact's true power only activates in the presence of the dreamer, and he believes the entity itself is the dreamer. The entity beneath Dunwich isn't hostile. It isn't spreading corruption. It isn't attacking the Commonwealth. And it isn't trying to break through into our reality. According to Jack Cabot's final hypothesis, refined from his father's work and decades of observations, the entity is simply asleep, and we exist within its dream. Every person who experiences the Dunwich effect, every vision of stone cities and impossible geometries, every compulsion to travel to the quarry isn't being corrupted or controlled. They're waking up inside someone else's nightmare. The hallucinations aren't intrusions from another dimension. They're glimpses of the dreamer's memories, bleeding through into the minds of those who get too close. Jack's notes describe it as a perceptual prison. The entity dreams, and its dream is so vast, so complete, that it contains entire worlds. The Commonwealth, the wasteland, possibly all of human civilization, exists as constructs within a sleeping mind that's been dormant since before Earth had continents. And if that's true, then every choice, every war, every moment of human history has been a story the entity is telling itself while it sleeps. If we exist within the entity's dream, then killing it means we cease to exist. But staying in the dream means we're never real. The dream hypothesis can't be disproven from inside the dream. That's the trap at the center of Dunwich. Jack compiled evidence for both sides. The physical obelisk exists, it can be touched and measured, and it predates human evolution by hundreds of millions of years. That suggests an external reality. But the visions are too consistent, too detailed, and they bypass all known laws of physics. That suggests a constructed reality. Some of Jack's contemporaries argued the Commonwealth itself shows signs of dream logic. The crater-pocked landscape frozen in 2077, the inexplicable survival of wooden structures after 210 years, the way certain locations seem to exist in temporal bubbles, small inconsistencies that could be explained by wasteland conditions, or could be evidence that the dreamer's attention to detail is slipping in areas it doesn't care about. Verification would require an outside observer, someone who exists independently of the dream. But everyone who could verify the hypothesis exists within the same potential construct. The Institute's synths, the ghouls who've lived for centuries, even Lorenzo Cabot, with his 400 years of continuous consciousness, they're all embedded in the same reality. If it's a dream, they're part of the dream. If it's real, their testimony means something. The only way to know if the hypothesis is true would be to wake the entity. And if it's true, waking it ends everything. By 2287, the sum of human knowledge about Dunwich fits in 3 filing cabinets in the Cabot House Library. Lorenzo's expeditions, the Cabot family research, pre-war archaeological surveys, and Jack's synthesis of everything his father learned in 400 years. All theories documented, all possible solutions identified. Seal the obelisk with radiation and hope the entity stays asleep. Destroy it with Kremvh's tooth and risk unmaking reality, or wake it deliberately and face whatever comes. None of the solutions guarantee survival. Sealing it only delays the problem, and the seals have failed before. Destroying it could erase the Commonwealth, or it could do nothing, because the obelisk might just be a symbol, a physical anchor for something that exists outside physical space. Waking it intentionally offers the most information, but information doesn't help if consciousness ends the moment the entity opens its eyes. The growing consensus among the few who know the full scope is that Dunwich represents a problem without a human solution. You can't negotiate with a dreaming god. You can't fight something that might be the foundation of your existence. The psychological weight of cosmic horror isn't the fear of death, it's the fear that your life was never yours, that free will was always an illusion, and that the universe operates on scales where human concerns are irrelevant. In the end, Dunwich represents the fundamental terror, that the universe is vaster and stranger than human minds can comprehend, and we are not the center of existence. The lesson of Dunwich is simple. Some knowledge breaks the mind that holds it. The Lovecraftian principle isn't metaphorical. It's documented fact in the Commonwealth, where holotapes record the cognitive collapse of researchers who looked too long into the dark. The human brain evolved to understand survival, social hierarchies, resource management. It didn't evolve to comprehend entities that exist outside linear time, or consciousnesses that can rewrite the fundamental architecture of reality. Survivors cope in different ways. Some refuse to acknowledge what they've seen, filing it under radiation-induced hallucination or pre-war drug experiments. Others embrace religion, reframing cosmic indifference as divine mystery. The children of Adam found comfort in the idea that destruction is holy, that their insignificance is part of a greater design. It's easier to worship annihilation than accept meaninglessness. The Brotherhood of Steel classifies Dunwich artifacts as existential threats and locks them away, treating forbidden knowledge the way pre-war governments treated nuclear codes. The Institute pretends the site doesn't exist, because acknowledging it would undermine their belief in human rational superiority. And the settlers? They just avoid the place, passing down warnings the way their ancestors warned children about deep water. And yet, despite the horror, humans continue to explore Dunwich, driven by curiosity, greed, faith, or the stubborn refusal to accept that some doors should stay closed. The expeditions never stop. Scavengers probe the upper levels for salvage worth the risk. The railroad sends operatives to investigate whether the entity can detect synths, hoping to weaponize that immunity. Lone wanderers arrive with metal detectors and Geiger counters, convinced they'll be the ones to crack Dunwich's secrets and walk away rich. Most don't walk away at all. The Cabot family maintains their vigil, monitoring seismic activity and psychic emanations, trying to predict the entity's next move. Independent scholars compile fragmented pre-war research, mapping Dunwich's tunnels and cataloging artifacts, building a database of cosmic horror, one blood-stained note at a time. They justify the cost in lives as necessary sacrifice for humanity's survival, as if understanding the entity might somehow grant the power to stop it. What drives them? Some claim scientific duty, others admit to obsession, the same compulsion that made Lovecraft's protagonists dig through forbidden archives and translate texts that destroyed them. A few are honest enough to say they don't know why they keep going back, that the pull feels external, planted. They return to Dunwich the way moths return to flame, aware of the danger, but unable to change course. Perhaps the most disturbing question is whether the urge to investigate Dunwich is itself planted by the entity, whether every explorer is a puppet on strings they can't see. Free will is the final question Dunwich poses. When you decide to explore the ruins, is that decision yours? Or did the entity nudge your thoughts weeks ago, planting curiosity like a seed, letting it grow until investigation felt like your own idea? The raiders who built their camp there, the cultists who carved stone, the pre-war workers who tunneled deeper despite the warnings, were any of them choosing freely, or were they following invisible threads? The entity doesn't need to control every action. It just needs to influence the critical moments, the decision points, where a person chooses to stay or leave, to dig deeper or turn back. Subtle pressure applied over years, across generations, guiding humanity toward outcomes the entity desires. You can't fight compulsion if you can't tell it apart from your own thoughts. Resistance requires recognizing the manipulation, but recognition might itself be part of the design. There's no answer. That's the point. Dunwich exists as a permanent question mark in the Commonwealth, a reminder that the universe is stranger than human minds can safely process, and that some mysteries persist, not because we lack the tools to solve them, but because the act of solving destroys the solver. The Dunwich mystery endures as an immutable shadow, a testament to the boundaries of human understanding. It is Lovecraftian horror given form, a place where the cosmos asserts its vast indifference to human significance. The enigma remains, a dark echo of truths too perilous to unveil.